Good morning. You're listening to the Blaine's World show, or a podcast, if you will, that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. You can also listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and you can get more information and listen to previous shows on our website, which is www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce the amazing Madison Brightwell, who's a psychotherapist, author, actor, and a whole bunch of other things. And Madison, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. Okay, that is Madison. And Madison has lived in the Asheville area for 4 years, moving from California with her husband, Ray. She works as an online psychotherapist, has written several books. She's also involved as an actor in community theater, recently starring in the one-woman show, Shirley Valentine. She'll be in another show we'll talk about later in today's program as well. But the question, Madison, I have to ask you is, in terms of as a child, you grew up where?
Oh, yes. Well, I had a really quite interesting childhood. I was raised in a place called Hull in England, which is on the northeast coast. Not a terribly nice town, a sort of industrial town. But oddly enough, I also spent some of my childhood years in Texas, in Austin. And that was just one of those things that happened. My aunt married a Texan. She ended up becoming an American citizen. My mother and I visited her, and I ended up spending several years in Texas. So I could say that I was raised in Hull and Austin, which was like two completely different places.
And when you were being raised, did you always know you wanted to be this woman who, I guess, did it all, but in terms of, did you know you wanted to be, when did you know you wanted to be an author? When did you start writing?
It's really interesting, actually. I always wanted to be an actress from the age of 7. I remember quite clearly stating that to my family, and they were all like, what? What is she talking about? The author part, I actually was writing stuff from an early age. I just wrote it. I remember I had a little magazine when I was about 8, 9, 10 years old. Little magazine. I called it Billy's Weekly because Billy was the name of my teddy bear. And I did like little cartoons and contests and things like that, and little stories. And so I was already doing that. And then when I was 10, I wrote a book, a whole book. It was called Kipo the Puma. And it was a shameless plagiarization of my very favorite book, which was called Capo the Leopard.
Close enough.
Yeah, by a guy called Rene Guillot, who set all his books in West Africa, and they were all about animals, and I was obsessed with animals. So it was a book all about this puma who was born in Africa, and then this big game hunter came along and killed his parents and took him to America and put him in a zoo. And then he was eventually rescued by this nice man who found him and freed him and took him back to Africa. So that's basically the story.
Wait a second, let me ask you, do you still have that book?
I do not, and it's the biggest regret of my life.
Oh, wow. Well, but you know what you could do? You could rewrite it, and pretend you were
about doing that. Yeah, I thought about doing that because I remembered the story, and I remember that the beginning of every chapter had a little 4-line poem which told you what happened in that chapter.
Too cool. Well, seriously, we have to get you to write it. And then not only will you get you write it, we'll then produce it as a show.
Yes, good idea.
Or a movie. Oh, is that a great story? So you're writing. I mean, it's an amazing thing. You're writing at the age of 7. When did you start acting?
Again, I always wanted to be an actress. I didn't start actually acting in plays till I was, I think it was 15. I think I was about 15, and there was a local community theater, and I did When We Are Married by J.B. Priestley, and I played the maid, and I had a very strong Yorkshire accent. You might have remembered when you saw me in Shirley, I had a very strong Liverpool accent. Oh, my native accent is a Yorkshire accent, and that's how I did the maid. It was a comic part, and that was the first thing I did.
And I'll ask you the same question about that first role. Is there a record of this anywhere, or did they ever take a movie of this?
No, that was eons ago before they had video cameras. Yeah, I think it would have been in the 60s, no, 70s, maybe something like that, early 70s. So no, there's no record of it, which is really a shame.
Well, think about this, Madison, because I have this great idea for a fundraiser for some local theater. I've shared it with other people. I'll share it with you, that everybody would recreate their very first role.
Oh, yeah.
So
yes.
you don't have to do the whole role, but you just do a 5-minute clip of it. But wouldn't that be a fun thing?
That would be a very fun thing. Yes.
So you could pass it on to other people. This was you at 16 or 17, whenever. So you got the acting bug. I mean, this is cool. You're writing, you're also acting. Take that part of your life, then we'll go into what you've done, since then, a whole bunch of things. But how did you talk about your acting bug? So you continued, I guess, most of your adult life?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was what I wanted to do. I was very committed to it. I moved to London when I was 16, thinking, I'm going to go to drama school. I'm going to be a big star. So I went to drama school. In those days, things weren't so expensive, so I managed to pay my way through drama school. And when I was 18, I guess I would have graduated from drama school. And then I just became a professional actress from that point. Worked for about 22 years, I think, in London as an actress. Apart from, I took 3 years off to go to college and get my BA in performance arts. So it was still all about performance and acting. Yeah, I worked pretty consistently. When I wasn't acting, I was secretary, typing, and that supported me when I wasn't able to get acting jobs. But I pretty much acted for maybe a good 50% of the time. I was able to support myself with acting. So yeah, it was amazing.
In the middle of that, how do you all of a sudden then become a psychotherapist?
I didn't become a psychotherapist in the middle of that. I actually didn't even think about becoming a therapist until I was on the cusp of 50, which is something I love to remind my clients about when they say, oh, I'm 45, I'm too old to start again. I'm like, oh, no, you're not. Because when I was, as I say, on the cusp of 50, I felt a little bit like my life isn't going the way I wanted to go, or I felt like I wanted to do something more meaningful with my life. And I was getting to that point we call in psychology the generativity phase, where you want to start giving back and being of service and all that, or feeling useful in some way. So that's when I started thinking about becoming a therapist. And so I went to actually hypnotherapy school when I was 50 in California. Did that for a year. I was a hypnotherapist for a couple of years. And then I went back to school again, got my master's, and did all the training to become an MFT. And then not even satisfied with that, I went back to school again and got my doctorate. So that all took about 10 years.
Okay.
So then when I was about 60, I graduated with my doctorate.
So I'm trying to get this. I think I have it. So you all these different things, then you become a psychotherapist in the 60s, and your line was so on target. I think it was Dear Abby many years ago wrote, somebody complained that they were too old to become a nurse, and Dear Abby wrote, it's going to be 5 years, what happens? And she said, well, otherwise you're going to be 5 years later and you're still not going to be a nurse. So why not become a nurse?
Yes, yeah.
I mean, so that's your story. That was pretty ambitious to all of a sudden start going back to school full time and to get a doctorate.
Yes. Well, I did it in little chunks. I think if I had known it was going to take me 10 years, I probably would have been like, no, I can't do that. But, I did it in these little chunks. So the hypnotherapy was a year of training, and then I worked professionally. And then I just felt like it wasn't quite enough for me. I knew immediately, I went to hypnotherapy school, that the whole dynamic of being a therapist was very right for me, because I've always loved psychology. I've always loved trying to figure out, what's going on inside someone's head. In fact, that's exactly what you do when you act anyway. It's so similar to being a psychologist. There's really, being an actor, you're like being a psychologist, but you're doing this role play version of somebody on stage, or on screen. So I feel like the two things are actually very complementary. So yeah, I realized that I loved it. I loved working one-on-one with people. I loved being in that role where I could help somebody and where they could say, wow, thank you. You've really helped. You've really improved my life. It's very, very fulfilling. And so I ended up, doing more of it.
Your life reminds me of one of my favorite quotes. I don't know if you know the name, a woman by the name of Shirley Chisholm. She was she was the first African-American to ever run for president. She was also one of the first women to run for president.
Oh.
And she said, so similar to what you indicated, that service is the rent we pay for living on earth. So
Nice.
we're in here to help other people. And so you were doing this, and I guess at the time, were you taking a break from acting for a bit?
I actually, I officially quit acting when I was about 35, I think, because I said to myself, at that point, I'd been acting for a long time, but I hadn't made it, and I did not want to end up one of those bitter older people who were just like, no, it should have been me. Right. So I just wanted to do something where I knew I could be successful at it, whatever it was. So I officially quit acting and I went into producing, and I actually did that for a few years. I produced medical training films. That, in fact, it's interesting, there was a sort of a crossover here. At that time, it never occurred to me I would ever be a therapist or anything, but I was making these medical training videos, and I was interviewing people for the videos. And the very first video I did, it was called Being Positive, and it was about HIV, which at that time in 1993 was a huge issue. And I interviewed, I think it was about 12 different people who were all HIV positive. And when you think about all the different aspects of putting a video together, and I said to myself, which did I like the best? I loved interviewing these people. I loved it that I had to sort of be sensitive to them, their concerns. They were all different. There was a young gay guy who was only 21, had only just been diagnosed. And there was a girl in her 30s who'd gotten it from blood infusion. There are all these different types of people, and they all had different experiences. And what I found really fulfilling was when the young guy said to me, when I saw that video, I showed it to my parents and they were able to understand me better through watching that. And it really helped me. And so that was the first time I felt like, oh, I can kind of use this part of me that's very empathetic, I guess, to help people. So that was a bit of a crossover into therapy, but years later.
Well, it's interesting as you tell the story, Madison, I see still another career for you. And so you laugh. So you become a psychotherapist. We're going to be talking about you becoming an author, an actor, and here's your next career, a podcast host. So you can also, I'm interviewing you, you can interview other people. So we'll get back in your spare time, Madison,
of which I have so much.
Exactly. So fast forward, if you will. So I think I'm getting a little bit of this, and you wind up in Asheville. How'd you wind up in Asheville?
Yeah, great question. Well, I lived in Los Angeles for 21 years. I fell in love with LA when I first visited in 1990. And I'd been there all this time. And there's lots of things I love about LA, but there are also things that I guess I was getting a little jaded. I'd been there a while. I've really had the LA experience. I was getting a little irritated with all the traffic and the fact that everything's so crazy expensive, and all of these things. And then happened to meet Ray, who became my husband, in 2017. Ironically, we both had lived in LA for about 20 years, and our paths never crossed until this day when they did. And he is from North Carolina. And I had a thing about North Carolina for a while, because I flew over there one time on the way back to England. And I noticed that it was just like this carpet of trees underneath me. And I was like, oh, it's so beautiful. I just love it. So I had actually visited a few times this state and kind of fallen in love with it. So Ray and I came on a little visit to Asheville. He's from the other side of the state, but he'd always loved the mountains. And we said, yeah, let's relocate ourselves here. So a couple of years later, that's what we did.
It's funny you mentioned LA and the traffic. And I almost have to laugh at myself a little bit when I think about Asheville. I said when I first moved here 15 years ago, there's no traffic compared to what it is now. And I say to myself, Madison itself, there's a lot of traffic. And then people point to me, you ain't seen nothing about traffic until you're from LA or from Washington. This is like no traffic to you, but it annoys me because I think this is great traffic compared to what it was 15 years ago. But tell me, I should check out LA and I'll know what traffic is.
Absolutely. But when I moved to LA, I came from London, and I was like, oh boy, this LA traffic is nothing compared to London. So, traffic, I think, is the worst ever in London, because they've got these little itty bitty streets and you have to wiggle around them. In LA, at least you have the nice big wide streets, even though they're full of cars, of course.
Anyway, so you come to Asheville or Black Mountain. You live in Black Mountain, right?
I live in Weaverville.
Okay, but yeah, it's like nothing compared to, I guess, what traffic really is. So I moved here 4 years ago, and I think I must have met you maybe 2 years ago, but all of a sudden then you're doing a bunch of things. So you're doing a psychotherapy we'll talk about. You're also writing at the same time?
Yeah. I had written a bunch of books in the 90s when I still lived in London. I think there were about 4 novels that I wrote between about 86 and 96 or so. So in that 10-year span, I wrote these 4 books, and they were all psychological crime thrillers, which is odd because, as I say, I've always been interested in psychology. I didn't know I was going to end up being a therapist. But they were all, as I say, psychological crime thrillers. I wrote them all. I didn't publish them. I self-published them in 2014, but they had just kind of sat on the shelf gathering dust for a long time. So then, but I hadn't written anything for about 20 years. And then in March 2020, Ray and I buy this house in Weaverville. We go into the pandemic, and it's not that there was nothing much to do, but I was spending a lot of time on my own, of course, because we all were, right? I used to walk around here. It's beautiful out here. You can probably see, well, you can't now, it's dark, but we live on an acre of land, and we're near the creek, and I would walk down to the creek, and I love this land so much. And at that time there was all this dissension going on, back 3 years ago, wasn't it? There were all these terrible things going on, people annoyed about the wearing their masks, and then there was all the political unrest and defund the police and all this stuff going on. Anyway, it all kind of percolated in my head, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world that was better than this one? So that was kind of the first little inkling I had about this book. I talked to Ray about it, and he said, oh, I love that idea, because I was saying, oh, couldn't we have a parallel universe where different decisions had been made, different choices had been made, and we had this whole different world that was better than this one, where people were actually nice to each other, and
Can you imagine?
Exactly. So kind of like a utopia, if you will. So again, you know, Ray kept encouraging me and saying, well, this is a great idea. I think people would love this. They'd find it really inspiring. And so I kept on thinking about it and writing it. And it took me about 2 years really to write it. Went through lots of different drafts and all that. But yeah, I guess it took me about 2 years. And so it's got a lot of my ideas in there of what I think a good society would be. And my hope with the book is that it's not just a story that people read and they go, oh, that was nice, you know, but it actually maybe inspires them to start thinking about things, or to start maybe thinking, well, how could we make the world a better place? You know, is there something we can do? So it's kind of like a positive, optimistic book, and hopefully an uplifting book, and a sort of gently inspirational. I hope so.
One of the things I like hearing about the book, which I haven't seen yet, I'm getting my copy, I think, this coming weekend, but it gives me another idea for another project for you, Madison, so that when we finish this, after you're doing your Synthesis podcast host, we'll have you put some of these books, either the past ones or this one, into movies or plays or something along those lines.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely would love to see this book made into a movie, and I already have ideas for the casting. So,
Oh, dear. Okay, we haven't gotten the screenplay yet, but we're already a step ahead of the game. If you would show the book, and then I want to talk to you about the title. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. So
is it? It's like a mirror effect, isn't it?
yeah, no, that's perfect. You have it. I can read it perfectly. So that's great.
So World Beyond the Redbud Tree, and yeah, initially it was just called Another World, and then I thought, oh, that's a little generic, isn't it? And then I realized that the redbud tree, and we do have one of these in our yard there. The redbud tree features prominently in the story. It is the portal to the other world, you see. So then I thought, well, that makes it a lot more specific, and it kind of gives a flavor of the book more.
And by the way, I love just so one more time, I love the cover. It's a beautiful cover.
Ooh, yeah, my publisher, the designer, the publisher's house designed that. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. And so it talks about the fact that people read this. So it's an actual novel then, right? It's not a
Yeah. I don't know if you ever read in the 70s or 80s the Celestine Prophecy. Do you remember that book?
I know the title. I don't know that I've ever read it, but it's along those lines.
It's along those lines, because the Celestine Prophecy was a novel. You could just read it like being a novel.
I do read it and refresh my memory on it. What was the story behind it?
It's this adventure story. I don't remember exactly what happens, but the guy, you know, he goes to all these different places, and he's looking for some old manuscript that's
right.
been,
Right.
All that stuff. But along the way, he gets these insights. I think there's about 9 of them. Insights, and they're all about kind of how to do life in insights, right? They're very sort of philosophical, spiritual.
Do you remember the author?
James Redfield.
Okay, yeah, and he written other books as well, but now I remember it well. This was the hot book in the 70s or
book, yeah. So that's kind of my inspiration when I wrote this book. It's a story. You can just enjoy the story, or you can also see it as a kind of a message book, if you like. And so at the end of the book, I have, I think it's 3 appendices. So the first appendix, maybe there's 2. Anyway, so one appendix is talking about the people. They're called the Kahazi people, who are the people who populate this other world that our heroine discovers. And it's sort of the history and culture of the Kahazis. So I'm basically showing you this whole other world, like creating the other world. And then the second appendix is it's this game that they play. It's a board game, and it's called Everybody Wins, or the game where everybody wins. And the point of it is that it's collaborative and not competitive. And so that's the appendix 2. And then appendix 3 is now it's up to you. I want to encourage you to maybe set up little groups where you talk about the ideas in this book, or you know, just think about how can we make the world a better place. So I really wanted to like spark discussion with it.
And just listening to you is sparking ideas in me, because again, we add another thing on your to-do list, Madison, and now it's going to be to publish this game. You know, so you talk
Oh,
about
wow.
Appendix 2.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Right.
could do
Yeah.
the game as well. And in fact, the book is meant to be the first of a trilogy. So in book 1, Charlie, our heroine, is 16. And then she is not able to go back to Kahazi again. And then in book 2, that's 10 years later, where she's now an adult. And then she has all these other adventures. And then book 3, Charlie's daughter is the heroine. So that's my idea for the other 2 books, although I haven't written them yet.
I was going to say, but are you in the process of writing them, or are you starting to write them?
Yeah, I'm in the process of writing book 2. I certainly have ideas for how it's going to go.
And talk about your writing process, Madison, in terms of when you write. Do you get up every morning at 7 o'clock in the mornings and write for 2 hours, or how do you write?
You know, it depends. When I wrote those books in the 90s, that is exactly what I used to do. And my husband at the time was annoyed with me. He said, how do you get up every morning at 6 and go to your room and write your book? And I was like, well, that's the only way I'll get it done, because I was working full time. And, you know, so I used to write in the morning before work. Really, the only consistent pattern I have now is that I'm a morning person. I'm very much a lark. My brain functions better in the morning. So I usually do my writing in the morning. It's the first thing I do if I'm going to be doing some writing that day. And I don't write every day consistently, but when I have the time to write, I usually do it in the morning.
And how long do you write for?
Usually a couple of hours. I don't write all day. I prefer doing it in a small little chunk. And I usually put music on or something to inspire me. Or actually the other day I was writing and I was walking on my treadmill at the same time, which was cool.
Until you fall off the treadmill, you know, but not paying attention to the writing. So
Right.
I'm curious too, do you do the same thing too with respect to your acting? And I will talk about that as well. You're getting back into acting now. How do you memorize lines? Do you do it? What's the process on that?
Of course, many people over the years have asked me that question. Usually people who come to see a show who don't know much about acting, they go, how do you learn all those lines? Like it's the most amazing thing. Well, how I do it, which is not necessarily how everyone does it, but how I do it is when I first get a script, I hand write out all of my lines, just my lines, and I leave a space in between each one. And then later on, I go back and fill it in the space. I put the subtext. So when I'm saying this line, where am I moving to, or standing, or what am I thinking, and what am I really saying by saying that line? You see what I'm thinking? So I'm writing the kind of the thought process underneath the line. So I'm not just learning the lines by rote, I'm learning the trajectory of what my character is thinking about at that time and what prompts her to say that thing. Yeah, what's the motivation?
So when you're learning the lines, do you also read them with your husband? Does he help?
Sometimes, yeah, he has been known to. Yes. I actually think he's quite a good actor, really. He doesn't realize it himself, but I could see him on stage.
Well, I can see you again in one of your writing projects, or if you go back to some of the other ones, you create a character for him. But it's funny you say that, because I asked another acting couple in the area, and they absolutely do not like reading with each other. You know, they choose not to. But you know, I guess it's an individual choice. And again, we're kind of skipping around, but just you do so many interesting things. And so you moved to Asheville. What got you back into acting? And was Shirley Valentine your first major role, or you done other stuff before Shirley Valentine?
Yeah, I did some other stuff. You see, I moved here in 2019. And partly the reason for coming here was it's such a great theatre scene, isn't it? It's a fantastic theatre community for the size of place we've got.
Right.
All the theatres and all the incredible talent here. So that was a big reason why we chose Asheville, actually. So I had done little bits of acting when I was in LA too, in community theatres. And when I first got here in 2019, I did a show at Black Mountain, which was called As It Is in Heaven. And I played it. It was a great part. She's kind of the bossy nun, I called her. She was like the eldest, you know, the head of the little organization. There were Shakers. She was the head, and she was kind of mean. And actually worked with Janice Schreiber, who was the lady who directed me in Shirley Valentine. She was in that show with me, which is how I knew her. And there was a moment in that show where I was really mean to her. And I remember one night an audience member actually gasped when they saw what I did.
Well, I guess too, if they booed you or, you know, but close to it.
They wanted to. I was not a nice person. And, yeah, worked with Janice in that show. I also worked with Candice Dickinson, who's now running art. Candice liked me so much, she asked me to come back and do a small little role in Oliver that she was doing at the Heart at that time. So that I did, and that was also in 2019. And then in 2020, my plan was to do as much acting as I could, but of course all my plans were foiled by a certain virus. So I went to the Heart, I auditioned. In February of 2020, I got cast in 3 shows, and then everything got cancelled. So I didn't do any of them. I did do Coriolanus at Diana Wortham, and I worked with Melon Weddick, and she was great, loved working with her, and worked with some very talented people in that cast too. Molly Graves played Coriolanus, and she was incredible. So that was a great experience, even though we only did 3 shows. So that was all, I think that was all I did in 2020, I think. Yeah, then we just like suffered through the pandemic the rest of the year. And then in 2021, I ended up I did 1 show because we were still, you know, not really back to speed. So I did the Montford show because, of course, it was outdoors. I did the Grimm's Fairy Tales. I just had a small part in it. But it was a really fun experience. It was nice. It was a big cast, 30 people, but everyone was so nice, and it was just such fun doing that show. And Victoria Lambert was the director. Again, now she runs Hendersonville. So
it's a shame because it just closed, but they just did a production. I saw it yesterday, Calendar Girls.
Yeah, I saw it the other day.
Oh, you saw it?
Isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, did you have fun with it? Wasn't it?
Oh, I love that show.
Oh, but I could have, it's too bad because I'm looking at you. I could have seen you as September, you know, or November. I could have, but I could have seen you in that role.
Months. I would have loved to be in it. Unfortunately, right at the time they were rehearsing, we were away in New Zealand for that whole month.
Yeah.
There's no way I could have done the show, but I was really disappointed that I didn't
I could see you in that role. And so fast forward, because I don't want to hold you up all night here, but you did these bunch of roles, and it's funny, I saw you, and I guess a bunch of them, but I didn't know you at the time, you know. So
yeah.
Then how did you come up with the idea, and you're going to be doing it again, I understand, of Shirley Valentine?
Yes, you know, I've wanted to do Shirley Valentine for years, because back in 2002, I was in a production of Blood Brothers. This was at a theater in LA. Blood Brothers is the musical that was written by Willie Russell, who wrote Shirley Valentine and also wrote Educating Rita, which was also made into a movie. I was cast as the lead role in Blood Brothers. Mrs. Johnstone, she's called, and she sings 8 songs and pretty much carries the show. And it was an amazing experience, and I'd won Best Actress for it and everything. And so I thought, you know, the next thing I want to do is Shirley Valentine, because it's like the tour de force thing that Willie wrote for a woman my age, right?
By the way, before we get into Shirley Valentine, you have to remember the Blood Brothers. I'd love somebody to do it. Nobody's done it in this area. So
no, they should.
Let's you and I bring it here. I'll help you with it. But one of my favorite, nobody knows the musical, but it's beautiful. I love it.
Oh, isn't it? Yes, I know.
So put that in again in your next. I'm giving you all these different careers, Madison. So
Damn it. I wish I could clone myself, really.
Right, but Blood Brothers, I'll co-produce it with you. But I'd love to have. I'd love somebody to do it. What a great show!
What a great show! Let's try and get it on at the Heart.
Yeah, well, that's where it would be. But so I cut you off. So Shirley Valentine, how does it come to this area?
Oh, what happened was I heard that Black Mountain were looking for productions for their season in, I think it was originally in 2021, actually, and then it got cancelled because of COVID. But they were looking for productions that featured women or, had all women. So that was the thing. So I asked Janice if she'd like to direct it for me. And she said, oh, yes, absolutely. And so we together put that proposal into Black Mountain. And it was supposed to be going up in September 2021, and it ended up going in for September 2022 in the end, which was when we did it. And I had the most amazing experience doing that show. It was incredible. It was unlike anything I'd ever done before, really, acting-wise. It was kind of like being a stand-up comic for an hour and a half, because it's kind of like direct to the audience, it's amazing.
The nice thing, though, I guess, about that role is if you do one person show, the only person who knows if you screw up, aside from you, is your director, so I couldn't tell, but wow, what a performance that was. And it was so good. I understand, talk a little bit about the fact that you're going to be bringing it back. Is that correct?
Well, I'm hoping to bring it back. I was looking for a theatre to do it in, and that would be my preference. If I could get a theatre to do like a run of it for 2 or 3 weeks, that would be my preference. But we'll have to see what I can work out.
I'm thinking the perfect theatre for you, of course, ACT has 35 below, but Hart does these beautiful. In the winter, you probably know about it. They do a
I know
season.
Yeah,
but they don't even do it. They don't even do the fact. And they do it in the other area. I think the little place where they use it for dressing and costume changes. And it seats about 35, 40 people. But Candace knows you, and what an ideal place to do it.
That was my very first thought, but Candace said no, they'd already done that show.
Oh, had they really? Okay.
Yeah, they'd already done it. So, if anyone watching this show wants to put Shirley Valentine on their theatre,
and they should. It's a show that has to be seen, and you did such a great job. But we digress. Let's go back to. Well, so it's amazing. Do you have? I wonder about you, Madison. Do you have a pair of like roller skates there, or how do you get from? I just find this incredible. How do you go from all these different things, kind of simultaneously?
Put my hats on. I put my hats on.
I guess so. So, in addition to all this other stuff, you are doing psychotherapy as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have really shrunk down my client load. What I love about my job is it's super flexible. I work from here. This is my office right here. I work on Zoom. I never have to go anywhere. So I just sit here and I see people. It's just like I'm seeing you right now.
And by the way, that's one of the reasons I love the podcast. I used to have to go to a studio every day. And what a pain. It's such a pleasure to be able to speak to people anywhere you want. But talk about that process, Madison, too, in terms of, and that's relatively new as well, that, they allowed to be telehealth or, the fact that you didn't have to see a psychotherapist in person.
Yes.
How does that work out for both, I guess, psychotherapist and the patient? Describe the process a little bit.
It's really interesting because when I first became aware of the idea of doing therapy online, I was very resistant to it. I remember I knew this older lady who had been doing telehealth for quite some time, and she said, "Oh, you need to do this. It's so great. You never have to commute." And I was like, "Nah, I don't like that. No, I can't. No, I have to see someone in person. I have to, I have to pick up all the little cues and blah, blah, blah." Anyway, once I started doing it, I started working for this company called, who's the first one I worked for? I worked for a company called Synchronous, who offered me a job, an online job, back in 2020, actually, helping nurses and doctors who were struggling with COVID. So it was fascinating. And I started doing this online thing, and I realized that not only do you have the great benefit of not having to commute, and I have this lovely house right here, which I love, and I can get up anytime I like and go make myself a cup of tea, which is wonderful. I don't have to put up with annoying people in the next office making a noise or anything like that, or turning the temperature down and all those things that happens in offices. And I realized that not only do I enjoy that part of it, but in fact, I think for the client, it's almost better. Why is it better? Because they are in their familiar environment. They don't have to get up and go to an office where they might feel a little bit like, oh, it's unfamiliar, it's uncomfortable, maybe the temperature's not good. You know what I mean? So they're in their familiar environment. I'm in my familiar environment. Yes, I only see down to here, but that's okay, because oftentimes if you're in an office, you're usually about 10 feet away from the person. Otherwise, they might feel a little bit like, you're too close. You know what I mean? Like invading their space. But with Zoom, you could be really close to someone without them feeling like their space is being invaded. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and even as we're talking, it makes complete sense. We're within a foot to two each other,
Exactly.
so we're
Yeah.
kind of in touch, and it makes so much sense because also I actually see a physical trainer, and we do it via Zoom. And
Wow.
what a pleasure not having to go to the gym and the whole bit. So
Yeah.
I love it. Madison, we're running against the clock. I have to ask you maybe a few last questions. Number one is that, so in addition to doing all this and promoting again, hold up the book one more time because it's just a
Yes.
great title. But The World Beyond the Redbud Tree. It comes out officially what day? It comes out this week, I think, right?
April 11th. So it's
Okay.
in about a month.
Okay.
Also want to tell everybody that I will be having a virtual launch party and an in-person launch party for the book.
Okay. And I have an idea. I'll tell you off the air about the book. Very
Oh,
exciting. But
yeah.
people will be able to order the book. Best bet is to get it through Amazon right now.
Amazon, yes, you can actually just go to Amazon and put The World Beyond the Redbud Tree and you'll come up with my book. It's there available for pre-sales.
Okay. And so people can get the book. In addition, Madison, I should ask you that if people want to get in touch with you, for example, either about, well, let's take the book first. If they want to specifically speak to you about the book, we'll eventually have a website you were telling me, but right now you have an email address is best for that.
Yes, I have a website. I haven't done a whole lot with it yet, and it does have an associated email address, which is info@yourworldbeyond.com.
Okay, so I'll have you repeat that one more time.
info@yourworldbeyond.com.
And so if somebody wants to get in touch with you, either about this book or about anything else right now, that's the best bet to reach you at that email address.
Yes, that would be fine. I also have a personal email, which is me@madisonbrightwell.com. It's pretty easy to remember. And as I say, the book will have its very own website at some point. Right now, you could just visit my author website where you could see all the books I've written, which is MadisonCBrightwell.com.
Okay. If you remember, send me off the air just those 3 websites, because I'll put them in the description of this podcast so people can want to reach you. And of course, I'm going to ask you to talk about one last project you're involved in, and that's coming up this summer. And
Yeah.
you're, again, going to be acting in what?
At the Cafe by Marcy Gallagher. Yes.
Okay.
A brand new musical. Marcy came to see me and Shirley Valentine. And after the show, she said, "Do you sing?" And I said, "Yes, absolutely." And so she said, "Would you like me to be in your musical?" So I said, "Oh, okay." So I didn't know anything about it. I have to say, I've been immensely impressed with Marcy, with how she's put it all together and continued working on it. And she's assembled an amazing cast for it. And we're going to be doing it at the Diana Wortham Theatre in August, 2 weekends.
And it just, we need to get one other thing from you, Madison, in your spare time, and that'll be a book about your life, because we're doing all these different things. And I forgot one other thing you do also, and I'll ask you a quick example of it, but you also work with people, voiceover folks, and people in terms of not just working with them, you actually are a voiceover artist as well. Is that correct?
Well, I don't do much of that at the moment because obviously I don't have a lot of time. What I will say is that I used to, when I was back in England, I used to work for a company called the Royal National Institute for the Blind. And I was one of a pool of actors who did all the audiobooks. They used to call them talking books. And I must have read hundreds of those audiobooks over the years. And I will be voicing my book when I get a minute. After it comes out, I will be making the audio version of it. I love doing voices. I love doing accents. But I'm not really doing that. I'm not putting a lot of emphasis on that at the moment because I have other stuff to do.
Because I got a kick out of the one time I met you when we were talking about this. And I was surprised. I thought this was the voice. I didn't know this was your actual voice. I thought, you did,
it on.
it was it's so much fun. You did a southern accent for me. I said, "Where'd that come from?" And you can hit them all. Madison, you are terrific. And it's just such a pleasure getting to know you a little bit, and I'll be involved in the at the cafe with you, and just to watch you in rehearsals or readings or whatever we're calling them. It's just so much fun. And look forward to seeing you in a whole bunch of different things in the future after we develop the game, the movie, for this book, books 2 and 3, and it looks like you have enough to keep you busy for the next couple of years.
Yeah, then I'll have to think of something else to do.
Madison Brightwell, as always, a pleasure. Just stay with me a second. I'll stop the tape, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so thank you again.
Thank you very much.
Great. And I'd like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti, and hopefully we'll see you soon again on another Blaine's World podcast. Okay, and sign off here.